The last time I did this talk was in the aftermath of having been banged up in Lewisham Jail for 25 hours during the day of the royal wedding. So it was done with feeling, to dissect and decode the English monarchy and to reveal what lies at the heart of the English royal coat of arms, but more of that later. I'm going to start by quoting Fred Engels, who wrote to Karl Marx, "There is more life and reality in the first act of The Merry Wives of Windsor alone than in all German literature." So he obviously had a very high opinion of this play. Engels, the author of The Origins of the Families, Private Property in the State, had an unerring instinct for sexual communism wherever it lurked. In Shakespeare's play, it appears that he's having lots of fun with these pompous husbands who are trying to assert their proprietorial rights over their errant wives. But the drama is actually celebrating women's collective, if not uprising, a carnival freedom. And it's ritually potent laughter, riot, rituals of license, subversion of the established order, which used to be called misrule by the powers that be. According to the powers that be, it's misrule. Comedy, in its formal dramatic sense, has its roots in popular ritual action and ritual uprising, and most especially the female kind. And we talked before Easter about Lysistrata. Some of you may have heard that talk, and this talk is like the brother talk to that one, because it has many of the same structural aspects as Lysistrata. So my hero is the mysterious figure of Falstaff, who's one of the great creations of English literature, a demiurge leader of riot, who no matter how ridiculous he seems, he's also numinous, he's tinged with something divine. His appetites are awe-inspiring for food, for drink, for wine, for sex, fair hot wenches and flame-coloured taffeta. His dedication to the pleasures of the flesh is religious. He is himself a hill of flesh, so described by a royal wannabe. Prince Hal, these are the upstart royalty. And really, the reason why Prince Hal is always hanging around Falstaff is he needs Falstaff's power to become a legitimate king. He's called also meat, the sweet beef that people eat. Now, I'm casting Falstaff in the role of lunar trickster, and I'm going to bring out the characteristics he has, which conforms to a really ancient type of trickster, one which would be recognisable to the bushman. I've talked quite a few times at RAG about the bushman trickster. But that's not all there is to Falstaff. He's got this layering which is really, really ancient, deep down, coming out of sort of hunter-gatherer structures. But he's a protean being. He's changing his shape all the time. And he's got a whole history of power and state power and kingship, the history of the English kingship, all behind him. Some literary critics who might have a bit of a knowledge of James Frazer, smattering of Fraserian anthropology, they have actually honed in on the fact that Falstaff is some form of he's got aspects of the so-called divine kingship. They see his role in the Henry IV plays, the Chronicle plays, as a mock king, or sometimes called interrex. And obviously he's defined in those plays in terms of his relations to royalty. The ritual sequences of the Henry IV chronicles are enacted between Falstaff and Prince Hal on fields of combat. They're actually fighting out the battles for the English kingship on fields of combat. And that, of course, is the way that divine kingships also tend to be structured, that there would be these mock battles between the sort of interrex who's holding the royal power and the real incoming new power of the king. there is one particular scene which is quite remarkable. It's worth mention, the Gad's Hill robbery, which comes, it's Henry IV, I can't remember, it's part 1 or 2. But it's, thank you. And Bardolph there is bemoaning the fact that what's happened is Falstaff's motley crew have fled the scene of battle. They're so cowardly. And Bardolph is bemoaning the fact that he's been made to shove speargrass up his nose to make himself look as though he's been in a battlefield. Now, I don't know how Shakespeare did it, but he is understanding the anthropology of Papua New Guinea initiation rites. The Hadza, for instance, who I've worked with, do this nose bleeding to pretend to bleed. Well, they are bleeding kind of thing. So this is a deliberate reference to male initiation ritual, the nose bleeding. So there are ritual aspects there that are just quite close to the surface. Jack and the Beanstalk, of course, is perhaps the nearest that we'd have in English law. Now, in the Merry Wives play, the ritual sequences come between Falstaff and the women, the Merry Wives themselves. But even in that play, he's occupying a territory of royalty. He's a kind of autochthonic power, genius of the English kingdom. And that word autochthonic is the right word, implying that he's indigenous. He's born of that very earth. And this is frequently found in the structures of African. I use a lot of comparison with African divine kingship because I know a lot about the royal ritual of Africa. And you get this structure of the autochthonous king, the original sort of king that belonged to the earth, has this aspect of riotousness. The drunken king is often called, whereas the incoming new kings they're coming from outside. They're foreigners, and they're coming to conquer the peoples of that land. But in order to take over the legitimate kingship, they have to get the power by one means or another from this indigenous potency. The potency comes from the indigene, and Falstaff represents that. The Falstaff of the Merry Wives has all these contradictions. He is both the cuckolder, he's the one who's supposed to be seducing the husband's wives, but he's also the cuckold. He keeps flipping between one and the other. There's no clear distinction. He is also both the wild huntsman and he's the hunted beast. So it's like these opposite contradictions. The unity of opposites is his characteristic, like a trickster. Now the sex strike logic, which I'm hoping nearly everybody here has some understanding about. Are there some people who don't know that at all? Lunarchy. I hope by this stage we've just about covered that. The sex strike logic of the lunar template with that side, ritual power, all the terms that associate with ritual power, the waxing moon, seclusion, because you're in a menstrual seclusion, eclipse, thunder, noise, rebellion, death, etc., incest, particularly, bleeding, rawness, taboo, animal mask, gender inversion, all that is the source of the trickster's power, effectively. Trickster really expresses the oscillation between these two phases, in my view, and Falstaff is doing that. And if you take the sex strike logic, then it's quite clear, and I will argue that by the end of the piece, it's quite clear why there shouldn't be any distinction. The man who's the huntsman is also the hunted beast. The man who cuckolds is also the cuckolder. They're both things. So these are all different ways of expressing ritual power. But what is extraordinary is how this ritual syntax has been preserved just so perfectly in high art, high literate productions, elaborate literary creations produced by genius, Shakespeare, respecting the syntax, and he doesn't waver, he gets it exactly right. And the level of fidelity here is really impressive because it stretches over thousands of years, because my sort of the pole that's holding up the tent is this Elizabethan comedy, The Merry Wives. But before Easter last term, I was talking about Lysistrata with Aristophanes, and they really are equivalent plays. They're showing an absolutely same structure. So I'm going to go back onto the ancient Greek comedy, the 5th century, Athens, the Dionysiac festivals of Attic Greece, which is where comedy, the word, actually comes from. And using Aristophanes' Lysistrata, the comedy of the sex strike, as a template, I can show there are really close parallels with Merry Wives. Both are comedies of women in subversive action. The Merry Wives is remarkable because women they really win all the way down the line. They organise everything, they pull wool over the men's eyes, they remain merry, honest, and full of laughter. I also, though, project the drama forward 300 years to the Italian operatic version, Verdi's Falstaff of 1893. And that was set to a libretto by a real genius, Arrigo Boito. Now, Levi-Strauss says that every retelling of a myth is equally valid. And in that case, Boito's Falstaff is actually the consummate version. Boito's libretto is sparkling. Every single word counts, whereas actually Shakespeare, it wasn't his best day necessarily. I mean, he has his good bits, but some of it's a bit lackluster. Boito fleshes out his Falstaff. The Merry Wives Falstaff is much more a stock figure compared to the rich, the deep character of the Falstaff of the Chronicle plays, Henry IV, 1 and 2. So Boito imports the rich and very poignant speeches that come in the Chronicle plays and melds them into the plot of Merry Wives with Verdi's fantastic music. So this gives his Falstaff a great, powerful presence, and he crystallises the ritual structure. He pares everything down to all the inessential parts are taken out, and it gives you the sort of the dark and light of this syntax exactly with precision. And they knew how fantastic it was. With Verdi's music, they realised it was magic, it was devilish. Boito called it touch it, and it burns, he said. So it really, really had a genius to it. Shakespeare's sources are much debated, and they're very various, but they work together because of the ritual syntax. There are classical sources like Ovid's Metamorphoses, with myths, especially the myth of Actaeon. I don't know how many people can recall the myth of Actaeon. Guy who's a hunter who never has sex with anyone, has a pack of hounds, and spies on the goddess Artemis and her nymphs who are bathing in a pool. And Artemis, in her wrath, turns him into a stag, and of course he gets hunted. So this reversal, the man who's the hunter becomes the hunter beast, torn apart by his hounds. So this is Actaeon. We'll come back to Actaeon. And then there's Jove, or Jupiter, Zeus, and Europe. And that was the story, we'll refer to it again. The bull, Jove, that emerges from the sea as a beautiful bull. Europe loves this bull, garlands it, and suddenly the bull takes her up and carries her off into the sea across the Hellespont. And this is the sort of source myth of Europe, the name of Europe. But besides these classical sources, he's got this local Windsor legend, and it is really a local and indigenous legend of Herne the Hunter. And Falstaff is disguised in the final act as Herne the Hunter. We'll say more. And then the English sources, the real English sources, are mummers' plays. These are seasonal ritual folk dramas which were particularly played at Christmas time. There were rituals of license, feasts of fools, when rustic revellers would have a go at their betters and make mockery of the church and the aristocracy. Now, there is pretty close equivalence of the ancient Athenian, what were called komoi, the rude choruses of Dionysiac revellers who in ancient Athens, who took the piss of the Athenian aristocracy with horseplay and cross-dressing, and it was really wrong sex, wrong species masquerade. So animal mask and gender inversion is all down in there. And I would say that the Mummers play stands in the same relation to Shakespeare's comedy as the old komoi, the old Dionysiac rituals, stood in to Aristophanes' very polished literary comedy of the 5th century Athens. And added into this, there were sort of Italian sources, Roman comedy, stock characters, Tuscan stories, which Shakespeare he always kept nicking Boccaccio's plots and so forth. Now, Falstaff of the Merry Wives is really a stock figure. He's the butt of all the jokes. He's not very interesting unless we remember the Falstaff of Henry IV, Part 1 and 2. But at the level that I'm discussing, which is the ritual episodes and the allusions to ritual, there's actually a lot of overlap between the Falstaff of the Chronicle and the Falstaff of the Windsor play. And it's especially in this character of the lunar trickster. Tricksters, cunning, wily, amoral, irrepressible, they never give up. These are the chief characteristics of the Henry IV Falstaff, who lives on his wits and ill-gotten gains of his cut-purse cronies. For all the low-life sleaze of the Boar's Head Tavern, he's the instructor and sage teacher of the prince. His very first scene with Hal in Henry IV Part 1 establishes lunar time and tide as his governing rhythm. We that take purses go by the moon and the 7 stars, and not by Phoebus, sweet wag. When thou art king, let not us that are squires of the night's body be called thieves of the day's beauty. Let us be Diana's foresters, gentlemen of the shade, minions of the moon. And let men say we be men of good government, being governed, as the sea is, by our noble and chaste mistress the moon, under whose countenance we steal. And it's, again, I don't know where does Shakespeare get it from? It's like he's got exact the hunter-gatherer logic of demand sharing, redistribution of wealth in accordance with the phases of the moon. Diana's for you can't say it more perfectly, more poetically. And then Prince Hal echoes the same sort of chorus back. The fortune of us that are the moon's men doth ebb and flow like the sea, being governed as the sea is by the moon. If you remember the scene about the death of Falstaff, it's also tidal, this very poignant scene where Falstaff doesn't appear in Henry V, but the report of his death makes this beautiful sort of emotional, very nostalgic picture. But it's spoken as Ian just between 12 and 1, Ian at the turning of the tide is when Falstaff dies. He's dying at the tide of the tide's turn. The notion of ebbing and flowing, waxing and waning is underlying the imagery of this huge size. For all his solidity, Falstaff fears he may dissolve and melt away like butter or grease. He's referred to as tallow. His followers live upon his substance and threaten to eat him up. He's referred to as meat. There seems to be anxiety about lean times ahead when Prince Hal's teasing, here comes Lean Jack, here comes Barebone, and asks, how long is it ago, Jack, since thou seest thine own knee? Falstaff says, my own knee? I was about thy years, Hal. I was not an eagle's talon in the waist. I could have crept into an alderman's thumb ring. A plague of sighing and grief. It blows a man up like a bladder. And this is just at the moment when he's about to introduce the news of rebellion and rottenness in the body politic, the kingdom. So the idea that the tricks of the body of this great sort of demiurge is also the body of the kingdom in some sense. Growth and decay, cyclical logic of swelling and shrinking characterise trickster law all over the world. Give a Khoisan, the Bushman example. Oh, sorry, it's not Bushman, it's Nama, this Khoisan Khoi. They have a trickster hero, Haitsi Bib, who starts as a really small child being carried by his mother, but he suddenly grows huge, and because he's grown so huge, he takes advantage of his size to throw her down and rape her. But then he comes back to his original size. And this was a story which the German philologist Hahn identified as describing the lunar cycle. It has lunar characteristic, this growing and shrinking. In the southern Bushman concept of lunar phases, the new moon is addressed by hunters with prayers for bringing luck to the hunt. But the moon, as it becomes big and fat, is a figure of fun, and it's conceived of as an enlarging stomach. So at the time of new moon, you're hungry and you want the luck and the light of the moon for your hunting. But by the time of full moon, you should have brought the animal back and should be able to eat it. Falstaff's stomach is just exactly the same kind of subject of ridicule. But this fatness also has aspect of sacred potency. It's not fanciful to think of Falstaff's fat as the same as the fat of the eland bull, the eland bull being the central motif of the menarcheal ritual, the first menstruation ritual of the Bushman groups. So when he first appears with his stag's horns, right at the end, the last act of Merry Wives, he says, "I am here a Windsor stag, and the fattest, I think, i' the forest." He threatens to piss his tallow, which is obviously something pretty obscene, referring to his sexual proclivities, but it's also actually referring to the way that stags waste away during the rutting season. They never eat anything. All they do is have sex. And that's a perfect lunar logic. You start as fat as possible, and then you get thinner and thinner and thinner on that side of the lunar logic. You're starting very fat, and you get thinner and thinner and thinner as you go back down, because you're having so much sex and you're not hunting and getting more meat. Falstaff is also called ox, a town bull, a boar, and he mocks himself. He says, "I do here walk before thee like a sow that hath overwhelmed all her litter but one." And he means his little page who's following after him like a piglet. Falstaff conforms to wrong sex, wrong species logic. His fatness has female connotation, which it does also in Bushman conception. At one point in Henry IV, Part 2, he calls his stomach a womb, with a ritualistic repetition, "My womb, my womb, my womb undoes me." And that idea traces to the mummers' plays, where they have false wombs often being made fun with. In the opera libretto, Boito makes a great play of this thinness-fatness opposition. And one of the very first arias, he brings in a section of that womb speech. Falstaff addresses his subjects, Bardolph and Pistol. "You're eating up my substance. If Falstaff ever got thin, he wouldn't be himself. Nobody would love him. In this great abdomen are 1,000 tongues that proclaim my name. This is my kingdom. I'll make it greater." Now, the moon itself is actually quite absent from the text of the Merry Wives, but of course the entire final scene is dedicated to moonshine revelry. And the moon's so much part of the scenery that it's hardly necessary to refer to. Boito, though, even where Shakespeare doesn't have it, he brings in lunar themes as a motif all the way through the libretto, and Verdi has this beautiful musical motif going with that. And it's very deliberate, interweaving old Tuscan proverbs on the reviving powers of the moon. And Shakespeare doesn't have this. They've done that themselves, and it's exactly right. So I'm going to try and expound the plot of the Merry Wives as lunar menstrual logic. So I'm focusing on the ritual structure, and I'm boiling it down, just like Boito did, and leaving out incidental scenes. They're not so interesting. The dealings between Falstaff and the women are what give ritual action at the core of the comedy. There's two spheres of action. There's the men's and the women's. And until the end of the play, they aren't actually brought together. The scheming and machination among the men, who are a motley crew, they have no interests in common. They're fraudulent, deceptive, cheating on each other, very competitive. The only thing that tenuously unites them is gripes against Falstaff. The women, by contrast, are genuinely cooperative. So we have Mistresses Page and Forde, and the sort of motherly women, still quite sexy and attractive. The wives themselves, and the older go-between, the gossip, Mistress Quickly, and then the young beauty, Anne Page, who's on the third from the right, third from the left. Some conflict is going on between the mother and daughter about when she's going to marry, but apart from that, there's a real loyalty amongst the women. They share the information, they act together, they're working as a coalition. Of the men, Justice Shallow has complaints against Falstaff's riotous behaviour. Knight, you've beaten my men, killed my deer, and broken open my lodges. To which Falstaff retorts, but not kissed your keeper's daughter. Slender, Shallow's nephew, one of the 3 suitors for the beauteous Anne Page, has had his pocket picked by one of Falstaff's men. But even Falstaff's cronies turn against him when he's almost out at heels. Pistol and Nym refuse to carry letters to the wives, whom Falstaff plans to seduce in order to get at the husband's money boxes. When Falstaff throws them out, Pistol revenges himself by going to Forde, the jealous husband, and spilling Falstaff's plans. He raises the ugly spectre of cuckoldry, one of the insistent themes of the play, and it's symbolised by horns and by the mythical name of Actaeon. Now, we can think a bit later why Actaeon should be associated with cuckoldry, because actually Actaeon was never married to anybody, and he never seduced anybody. He was a sex-strike hunter. Forde is disguised as Master Brooke, and he goes to Falstaff engaging in false plots to test his own wife's fidelity. Falstaff just can't believe his luck. He's going to get paid by Forde to put his plans of seduction of Forde's wife into operation. Okay? But this chicanery backfires on both men. Falstaff's made a fool of by the women as a fat, old lecher who couldn't possibly be attractive to them, while Forde is made a fool of for his excessive jealousy and suspicion. So this is what Forde has to say. I will rather trust a Fleming with my butter, Parson Hugh the Welshman with my cheese, an Irishman with my aqua vitae bottle, or a thief with my ambling to walk my ambling gelding, than my wife with herself. Okay. Well, stereotypes rule there, okay. Racist, sexist, as bad as it gets. Falstaff and Forde are really alter egos, and there's an uncertainty running through the whole play about who's really the cuckold, who wears the horns. At the level of its surface, there's a sort of bourgeois morality pervading that's trying to protect the marriage bond in the play, but that's it completely in denial of what's going on at the structural level. Much as the women protest outrage at Falstaff's attempts on their virtue, actually the whole comedy is generated by the women making repeated plans to come into contact with Falstaff in a series of increasingly dodgy circumstances. At the same time, the contact gets disrupted between husband and wife. So it's the jealousy of the husband that's the real threat to the women's well-being, and especially to Alice Forde's. So I'll just go through the fundamental episodes, the 4 episodes which represent these contacts between Falstaff and the women. So first of all, he writes identical love letters to Alice Forde and Meg Page. The women compare notes and are absolutely outraged to see it's exactly the same, but for the names have been changed. It's like a corporate letter that's been sent to them. I warrant he hath 1,000 of these letters, writ with blank space for different names. Sure, more, and they are of the 2nd edition. He'll print them out of doubt, for he cares not what he puts into the press when he would put us to. No. The chief objection of the women to Falstaff seems to be he's such a big, fat, ugly whale, rather than moral principles. But anyway, they decide to conspire to humiliate this would-be philanderer. Let us consult together against this greasy knight. Now, what I'm going to do is take, I'm not going to prove it too much to you, but I'm going to take as kind of given that these identical letters are messages from a moon husband. Falstaff is a lunar trickster. He should woo all women with the same message, the message of blood. He comes to visit the women when menstruating. Just as with Aquila, women's biggest husband is the moon. All the women are dallying with the moon husband. Doesn't matter if they're rich or poor, if they're high or low, if they're young or old. As Pistol says, he courts all women. So do the subsequent meetings between Falstaff and the wives have a menstrual lunar character? And yes, I think there's no doubt that they do. The second episode, I'll show this is the one of the laundry basket. Alice Forde has made an assignation with Falstaff at her house when her jealous husband's gone away. But Falstaff, in his conspiracy with Forde, the husband of Alice, as Brooke, has given away the information about the meeting to Forde. So Meg Page runs scurrying in to tell Alice her husband's coming with a posse of men from Windsor to expose his wife's infidelity. So the women hide Falstaff in the only place big enough, a giant laundry basket covering him over with piles of dirty linen. A great deal is made of the stinking, villainous quality of this linen. So I think it's pretty reasonable to accept it as a euphemism for menstrual rags. As the men rush in, women order the servants to carry this huge, heavy basket to the Thames, leaving the men to search in vain. Falstaff gets thrown into the Thames like a barrow of butcher's offal. He tells Forde as Brooke how he was rammed in with foul shirts and socks, the rankest compound of villainous smell that ever offended nostril. And he was cooked in this grease. Think of that, a man of my kidney. Think of that am as subject to heat as butter. There's melting again. A man of continual dissolution and thaw. It was a miracle to escape suffocation. And in the height of this bath, when I was cooled, glowing hot, in that surge, like a horseshoe. Think of that, hissing hot. Think of that, Master Brooke. Remember, Master Brooke's name is the Brook, yeah. And so the women cool the fire of Falstaff's lust. Boito in the opera makes a beautiful drama out of the laundry basket scene. The men come in hunting down Falstaff as the beast. It's already a hunting metaphor there. Everyone is confused because there's the young lovers, Anne with her boyfriend, Fenton, behind the screens. They're making these squelchy kissing noises. And they all jump onto Fenton thinking that it's Falstaff. Meanwhile, Falstaff is sweltering the basket next to a fireplace, getting cooked before he gets soaked. So we've got fire, water. Boito plays this fire against water perfectly, exactly. Jealous Forde and his wife are confronting each other across this laundry basket, which is full of the dirty linen, the menstrual rags. So he says, foul woman, hell with these rags. Proper marital, so it really is menstrual rags disrupting the marriage. The women are getting the bit between their teeth by now. I know not which pleases me better, says Alice Forde, that my husband's deceived or Sir John. So they decide to pull the trick again, making another assignation through quickly. So the third one is the episode of The Witch of Brentford. This time, when Meg runs in to say Forde's coming, they can't find a hiding place. There's no escape. So they have to disguise Falstaff as an old woman, this Witch of Brentford, whom Forde absolutely hates. Forde comes in and he makes the servants empty out all the laundry baskets, just in case. Meg comes down with the old witch dressed up in a huge gown. Forde flies into a rage and runs Falstaff as the witch out of the house, beating him black and blue with a cudgel. Now, according to sex-right logic, in the ritual phase, each sex should acquire the attributes of the other. So it's wrong sex is the logic. So gender is ambiguous in the ritual phase. So this is absolutely appropriate. Gender of power cross-dressing. Falstaff acting the old witch. From now on, the women then start to involve the men in their plans, and they shame Forde into giving up his stupid jealousy, and they start to conspire together to bring Falstaff's public downfall in the very final scene, the fairy scene, the moonshine revelry. And this happens again because of the promise of a meeting with Alice. So Falstaff is going to be lured to Herne's Oak in Windsor Forest at midnight between 12 and 1, this witching hour, in a disguise as the eponymous hunter, Herne the Hunter. with a stag's horns and a rattling chain. He's going to be set upon by a whole company of fairies and elves, hobgoblins, jackanapes, pinched and burned, tormented and scared out of his wits, until he gives up his wicked and philandering ways. Forde gets his opportunity to say, well, who now wears the horns? There's a subplot that goes on about the marriage of Anne Page. Her parents both want her to marry, each parent wants her to marry a different suitor, and they're arranging for her to be disguised in a particular colour so that the desired son-in-law can sneak off with Anne to get married. But of course, she outwits them by by eloping with her lover Fenton and leaving little boys disguised in the fairy gown that she's supposed to be wearing. So we end up with a wrong-sex marriage as well. Now, this scene of the moonshine revelry is rich with ritual and mythical allusions. We've got the oak, the black hunter, horned gods, the references to the garter, which I'm going to finish up with. The garter being the potent emblem of the English kingship. But at the general level, I just want to say, in these contacts between Falstaff and the women, the whole gender of power logic is operating. Wrong sex, wrong species, bloody time, the time of menstruation, expressed in these repeated episodes. He's treated as a menstrual rag. He's thrown like dirty linen into the river. He's feminised, but he's a ritually potent female, a witch. And he becomes the hunted beast to be devoured. Now, as soon as I saw that structure, I realised that I'd seen it before in Aristophanes' very famous comedy of the sex strike, Lysistrata. And I talked about Lysistrata. Anybody who remembers from last term, we went through these episodes then. The points of comparison are really exact. It's not just a sort of generic or vague similarity. It's a tight comparison. So Lysistrata represents a tradition that belonged to Greek comedies of women's rule, with a world turned upside down and women taking over power. In The Merry Wives, we have a sort of mild Elizabethan version of that. It's not so grand in its cause as Lysistrata going on strike to stop the war between Athens and Sparta. But a strong hypothesis would be that all true comedy has some kind of combination of these tricks. And if you think about the traditions of pantomime, that strongly correlates. So we have a women's conspiracy with the letters, and in Lysistrata, the swearing the sisterhood over the bottles, the sacrifice of the wine bottle, the wine cask. We have Falstaff being ducked in the Thames with the dirty linen after being cooked. So women wetting males, and in Lysistrata was this battle between the women in the chorus who poured cold water on the torches that the old men of the chorus were trying to bring to burn down the Acropolis. And we have particularly the cross-dressing of the male antagonists. Falstaff as the Witch of Brentford, but it is precisely comparable to the magistrate, the probulos, who gets veiled by the women who are on sex strike and then driven away, beaten away from the Acropolis with cudgels, just as Falstaff is. Herne the Hunter correlates with the chorus, which is about Melanion. And I'm going to say a little bit more about Melanion because he's the type of the male initiate in Greek sort of initiation schemas. And it was only when I saw, in Lysistrata, there isn't so much hunting law there. In fact, that chorus of Melanion is just about all there is to speak of. And in the version that we read collectively, if any of you took part in that, they actually cut that bit out. And you can easily do that. It's not essential to the plot. But it is the key hunting reference in Lysistrata. But with Falstaff, the whole thing is about hunt. It's got the hunting motif coming back and back, and all the whole last act is obviously about the hunted beast and the hunter. So it now becomes really clear that it is direct hunting law and ritual, these black hunter rites, connecting to comedy, carnival and riot. They're directly related to each other. Now, one of the figures who's obviously linking them is Dionysus, the presiding deity of the comic festivals. And he has a very archaic aspect as Zagreus, the hunter, is one of his sort of avatars. One of the oldest layers of ritual associated Dionysus with the Agrionia type of ritual, which was very widespread in Greece, where a priest of Dionysus, who was blackened in the guise of the black hunter, would chase away women from a sacred precinct, and the women were all white. They were whitened. Plutarch reported, so this is the main source, classical source we've got on Agrionia, that the priest literally hunts them down and he will kill any woman he catches. The women are fleeing away and the priest tries to catch them. So in the Merry Wives, we have a sequence where Falstaff is the black hunter. He's also wearing horns, but he's the black hunter, and he's chasing away the women from the oak. And that's immediately recognisable as the action of the ancient Greek Agrionia. And if we look at that ritual, we can understand it as some form of male appropriation of female potency. The dark colour connotes paint or blood, and it associates with hunting, the ritual powers of hunting and menstruation. Real females, who they are having ritual potency stripped away from them by painted with white. And they're driven away on pain of death from a secret initiation site. We could think, you've heard Jerome Lewis talking here about what would happen if women came onto the secret pathway of the Njanga in the Babenjele's male initiation, Ejengi rituals. They would do exactly the same thing. The men would be holding the ritual power and they would chase away. In fact, they do threaten. They chase the women away, throwing at them these mapombe fruit. And if the fruit touches the women, they would die, is the belief. So it's exactly the same structure. Now, Dionysus is a menstrual lunar deity. He's enormously old. He's the god of the Maenads, the rioters on the mountains, who hunted beasts and tore them to pieces, if anyone recalls Euripides' Bacchae. And Dionysus' savage imagery, it has blood, it's raw, it's full of incestuous connotations, transvestite. Dionysus is always depicted as being gender effeminate, beardless. He has horns, he's the bull snake. But he's also Bacchus, who is a light-hearted bringer of wine to civilization, and has his laughing train of the satires. One of the chief companions of Dionysus is Silenus, and that is likely an ancestor of Falstaff as well. Fat, pot-bellied, of gross appetite, Silenus was renowned for craftiness. If you got hold of him when he was drunk, he might be induced to utter words of wisdom and deep perception. So he's some kind of trance. He's got kind of abilities of trance. So that's not a very good photograph, but you can see the outline and shape of that mask. So this is a Greek mask of Silenus. And he has horns. He's got little horns there. A Bacchic crown of grapes and a great big beard. Yeah, he's all bigger than yours, Robin. But it really is the Falstaff look. He's very devilish. Prince Hal calls Falstaff that old white-bearded Satan. It's quite clear that this was the depiction of Satan by the Christians as they diabolized the old kind of mythical sources. Just as Silenus and his company were part of the revelry in the Attic, the old Greek komoi, fat, bearded, masked and horned characters also acted as the masters of ceremonies in the English mummers' plays. Particularly there's Beelzebub, who would be dressed as an old woman. So Beelzebub would switch gender, just like Falstaff as the witch. And then there's Father Christmas, huge, fat, red. He had a red mask with horns, and this was usually a bull's mask. We associate Father Christmas with reindeer, but it seems that this kind of mask, the bull, was more common. Father Christmas officiated in the battles between the King of England and the King of France, or between St. George and the Turkish knight. Now, when one of the adversaries fell, he would have red ochre in his hand, and he would apply it to the groin area of the fallen knight, and then he would sling him over his shoulder and carry him to the doctor who would then revive the knight so that another battle could be fought. Death and rebirth with blood applied to the groin. Okay, I don't really need to spell it out very clearly. There's a sequence in Henry IV, Part 1, right at the end on the field of Shrewsbury, where Falstaff, after he's played dead, he's pretended to be dead to avoid being in the fight, he finds Percy, the rebel, dead, killed by Prince Hal. He wounds him in the thigh, picks him up and carries him off to Hal, saying he's killed him, claiming to have killed him. And that sequence really has a heritage from Father Christmas, picking up the fallen knight and putting it down there. And it's playing with this lunar logic, this death rebirth logic. Exactly. So our horned gods, let's go forward a little bit, reach right back into the Paleolithic, the sites of ritual and rock art. And we've got imagery of this kind drawn from the ancient European rock art. But if I wanted to find a historic ethnographic example of ritual governing the hunt, which is also licentious riot, is also kind of uprising and riotous laughter and games, really the best one is the Bushman eland bull dance, the menarche, the ritual of first menstruation, which I claim is, the eland bull dance is probably the oldest ritual in the world. There isn't any ritual older. It goes right the way back. So how closely does the action of Falstaff and the women in the forest compare to the eland bull dance? He's the fattest stag in the forest, chasing my doe with the black scut. Divide me like a bride buck. Each have a haunch, he says, going on to designate parts of his body to be divided up like a game animal's. He's performing a dance of fantasy animal sex with both of the women. The key difference between the hunter-gatherer rituals and what's going on in the comedies is the association with royalty. The menstrual potency that governs hunting, fertility, the fat of the land in the hunter-gatherer conception. So there you have the girl with her mask as the eland bull, and she is construed as being, she is all fat and good like the eland bull because of the fatness of the bull. The eland bull is fat in a female way, usually antelopes. The eland is a mighty game antelope. Usually with antelopes, the female is fatter, but with the eland bull, it's the male, a kind of male-female. So this is very gender ambiguous, and the women of the group are dancing around with horns, dancing around that girl in her menstrual hut. And so she is the eland bull, and the women are dancing with steps as if they are elands mating with the bull. So it's a fantasy of animal sex. Okay, so this potency, just to say further for anyone who hasn't seen this before, these are the hunters who are pushed away at the time. The girl in the hut is the power, has the power that draws. This is actually an eland, draws the eland to be hunted to the group. Okay, so this power of hunting, fertility, menstruation is all what's lying underneath the eland bull dance, but it's been appropriated for the legitimization of kingship, the kingdom, and the incoming foreign ruler of the kingship. Yeah, and Falstaff is bound up in that process. So he's got the hunter-gatherer layer and then this divine king layer on top. So if we see him prowling round the oak at the midnight, we have a picture that's really like James Fraser's opening scene of the Golden Bough, where the priest king of Arisha, the grove of Diana, watches warily for any challenger to his office. Falstaff's phrase about Diana's foresters is exactly appropriate to the priest king. Many 17th and 18th century prints recorded this tree that was variously reputed to be Herne's oak, which eventually got cut down by Mad King George. And there's one view that shows the Windsor hunting forest, a view over the Windsor hunting forest. So there's the Windsor Castle. And King Henry VIII is depicted right at the top of that hill. And Herne the hunter is riding by. And Henry's seeing this ghost of Herne the Hunter. Now, what's happening there? So this is a sort of mythical record, image of this mythical episode, but it's a transfer of power, legitimating these upstart Tudors, this new dynasty that has no real rights in the royalty, in being the English kings, are being given legitimacy by this ancient English indigenous figure. The oak, of course, was sacred to Jupiter Zeus, especially as a blasted oak struck by lightning. Mistress Page describes Herne walking round about and himself blasting the tree. Falstaff invokes Jupiter, Jove, he calls him, with the legend of how the god, in guise of the bull, carried off Europa, comparing his rampant sexuality with the gods. But this story, again, has precise parallels in the southern Bushman stories of the rain bull called ochre, who carries off the menstruating maiden. So this idea of the Europa story is also very ancient. So can we get direct linkage between hunting, royal power, and menstrual potency in Merry Wives? So this is Mistress Page recounting the Herne legend. There is an old tale, goes that Herne the Hunter, sometime a keeper here in Windsor Forest, doth all the winter time at still midnight walk around about an oak with great ragged horns, and there he blasts the tree and takes the cattle and makes milk kine yield blood and shakes a chain in a most hideous and dreadful manner. And she goes on, you've heard of such a spirit, and well you know, the superstitious idle-headed eld received, and did deliver to our age this tale of Herne the Hunter for truth. So this is very reminiscent of imagery of blasting or blighting and the cows milking blood, of descriptions of witches and menstrual women in widespread folklore across Europe. There was stuff about this from the Latin authors Pliny and others. Herne was supposedly, actually, there's a sort of local legend, he was a huntsman of a Plantagenet king who stood in the way when a white hart, a white deer, charged the master, the king, and Herne himself got wounded in the thigh. Now, of course, so we've got all these wounds in the groin and the thigh, which recall myths of like Adonis and so forth. Now, the one who really bleeds and dies is the true indigenous king. The so-called royals, the Plantagenets, the Tudors, or the Saxe-Coburgs, as we might call them, they're the fakes. Yeah. So I argue that these rituals and myths are of an authentic English tradition that enabled these incoming conquering monarchs who were making expansionist kingdoms, warring monarchs. They were establishing, these kings came out of warfare and really only lived by, we're just coming out of the period of the Wars of the Roses, we're just coming out of the all the Crusades, and so they really lived by warfare. But in order to justify that, they had to claim legitimacy as national rulers through powers over fertility, menstruation, and the fat of the land, the hunting. In Africa, the language would also incorporate rain. The kings are rain chiefs, and very much rain isn't in such shortage in England. But this is highly similar to series of Central Bantu, the Central African myths of kingship, which have been analysed by Luc de Hoche. So Herne, let's just say some more about Herne. He belongs to there's a swathe of stories across Europe about the wild hunt, the chasseur maudit, the cursed huntsman, some blasphemous pagan king who's been cursed to hunt forever. In other words, he's stuck forever in one phase of that oscillating lunar phase. He's stuck forever in one side of it. And really, it's not just... So he may appear to mortals. Mortals may see the wild hunt going by at one particular time of the year when the huntsman appears. These stories don't only express an antagonism between pagan and Christian ritual, which obviously they do, because he always blasphemes the Sabbath. But there's something much older. It's an irreconcilable opposition of hunting and farming. Just in that poem about Herne, he's turning the cow's milk into blood. Yeah. So he's trying to. So these domesticated animals of farmers are becoming like hunted prey instead. And they're always described. So these cursed huntsmen are described in terms of barrenness, sterility, blasting. Yeah, just what menstruating women are supposed to do to meat being cured, or the milk of the cows. Any transformative process, a menstruating woman messes it up immediately. Similarly, the huntsman. Herne's name can be connected to Herion, which was a title of Woden, a Norse king of the gods, but also Herle, who is a British king, subject of medieval legends of the wild hunt. Now, these Germanic names, when they became Latinized, became Herlecini, the people of Herlekin, who were described in visions by the monks and priests of northern France as souls in damnation. They were black and fiery, riding on saddles with red-hot nails. The leader of the hunt is Harlequin, the very same who becomes, in Commedia dell'arte tradition in the Latin lands, the fool, the comedy king, the leader of the carnival. Falstaff stands at exactly the same crossroads as Harlequin. He's both the wild huntsman and the carnival king. This really beautiful print, and I don't know its provenance very well, but it expresses exactly the gender of power logic. Harlequin is identified as goddess Diana, or Artemis Diana in the Roman, the goddess of the hunt and the new moon, and also childbirth, remember. He was a great bender of gender in the carnival, and particularly with regard to reproductive processes, because he could have false pregnancies, he could wear false breasts and breastfeed babies. So you've got it all. You've got the new moon, you've got the hunting, and you've got the cross-sex. The symbol which really ties, and this is going in for the kill. How long have I got? A little bit. Going in for the kill. I'm going to go in for the kill. The symbol which really tries English royal power and menstrual potency together. I'm getting feedback here. There's too much menstrual potency going on. Let's keep away. Am I still in shot? Yeah. The menstrual potency and royal power. Thanks. Great. Is the garter. And this emblem is quite special in the Merry Wives. The Merry Wives in some ways revolves around the garter, because it was originally produced for the garter feast, at which one Lord Hunsdon, patron of Shakespeare's company, was installed as a knight of the garter. The Garter Inn is one of the key settings of the play, and it's actually Falstaff's seat. It's like his stamping ground. The speech by Mistress Quickly as the Fairy Queen is a rather... No. They're not letting me talk about the garter. I don't know if we can unplug it. Can we do that? I'm not sure, because it's all plugged in here. It's all wired in. You're right. No, it's still in the shop. Okay. So I've said the occasion for the production of the play was the Garter Feast. Falstaff's stamping ground is the Garter Inn. And Mistress Quickly, right at the end, when she's playing the Fairy Queen, has this slightly ludicrous literary conceit about the garter. The flowers supposed to have the motto of the garter written inside them. And this is just Shakespeare toadying up to his aristocratic patrons. The legend of the garter tells of the reign of Edward III, and this is actually a depiction of Edward III founding the Order of the Garter, I think. He was dancing with the Countess of Salisbury, and her garter fell down. Now, I've read enough African myths of this kind to know that what really fell down is some sort of menstrual cloth. It's not just a garter, is it? The king then picks it up and utters this motto, "Honi soit qui mal y pense," evil be to him who thinks it, so deflecting, a sort of reversal, deflection of any curse or evil thoughts. And then he ties it onto himself. It's a bit gender bending, really. So the English coat of arms shows the structure of the lion opposed to the unicorn, and the motto, and they're both rampant around this garter thing with the motto inscribed around it. There's your coat of arms. Now, the garter's shape is what's usually known as vesica piscis in a Latin circumlocution. It means, we don't have raga here, it means it's the shape of a cunt when a woman has her spread legs, spread thigh, and you're looking. We're going back to the cosmic vagina that Dave was talking about here 2 weeks ago. It's exactly the same thing. The passage between two worlds is exactly the same thing. Now, this is an example of something which is generic. It's a worldwide tradition of emblems of ritual power sharing this structure of two beasts either side of a symbol of female potency, more or less overt. So this can be a mistress of the game, which could be like the Cretan Artemis. But in these examples, we've got Etruscan Gorgons with lions on that side. This is Nootka, Canadian Arctic hunters, that side. Here we have some monkeys. This is Ecuadorian example. This is Sepik, Papua New Guinea example. So it's really worldwide. And this comes from an article called The Heraldic Woman by Douglas Fraser. Was it Douglas Fraser?
Fraser spelled with an S.
With an S. No relation to James. And then we get it in the Cretan Artemis. That's not so very well produced. But it's the lady of the wild things. Remember, Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, the goddess of reproduction, childbirth. She has her animals either side and some representation of female potency there. And again, I'm going to track right back to the Bushman and Khoisan examples, and this is from Bushman rock art of the Drakensberg in Lesotho in southern Africa. And these are wide. This is something that can be seen in hunter-gatherer art in Africa, right the way up to East Africa, recurrently, these spread leg figures. And it becomes really clear what they're about. They have these these are all red ochre, big red power blotches. They combine a duality of gender because they've got penises as well as something that we presume represents cunt and menstruation. This is an image, this is argued, I would argue, and others have argued, that this is an image of a female initiate at a time of potency when she's menstruating. She is both the hunter with the bows and arrows, she is the hunted beast, she has tremendous power and fatness, and she has both male and female aspects in the genital region. It's very powerful, double-sexed. But then you can get quite extraordinarily beautiful. I mean, this is the sophisticated Flemish medieval tradition of tapestry, and it is just so beautiful. The Dame à la Licorne from Musée de Cluny. And again, lion, unicorn, a red, ritually potent lunarchic lady. Look at her beautiful little moons, little new moons. She's surrounded by a fertile sward of creatures, wild creatures. Look at the rabbits, lovely little rabbits. And the garter, it places female reproductive potency, cunt power, right in the middle of the English royal coat of arms. I mean, there isn't really much argument about it. The garter is supposed to be blue, a light blue, when it's tied on to whoever it is that the Queen has invited into the select the body. There are supposed to be 25 or 20, I think it's 25 members. You once you're in the Order of the Garter, you're there till you die. 25, and the Queen, there's 24, and there's the Queen and her consort, or the Prince of Wales. Yeah, the Prince of Wales. And they process in pairs. So what you get is 12 pairs, and then these extra monarchs making sort of half moons. So there's something about moon and sun going on in the connection. It's that extra bit of the lunar calendar that doesn't fit in the solar year is being referred to. So the remaining conundrum of this play is the theme of cuckoldry. Why is it symbolised by the horns? Why does Actaeon have anything to do with it? Why is the cuckolder also the cuckold? So Forde and Falstaff, so there's our... coming back to Lunarchy and finish this off. Forde and Falstaff are both cuckolder and cuckold. Why is it a hunter who turns into the hunted beast becomes identified as cuckold? Why is possessing the horns the sign of the cuckold? And that means possessing ritual power. So I think sex-strike logic, in the form of ritual of license, carnival at dark moon, solves those problems directly at a stroke. If you're working in the sex-strike logic, the Lunarchy logic, you have sex-strike at dark moon when the women are menstruating, sending their husbands away, and the husbands have to go back to their sisters, so you're envisaging a good old Engels matriarchal clan moiety system. So from the point of view of a male, if you observe sex strike, Actaeon was the hunter who observed sex strike forever. He wouldn't have sex. It's like Hippolytus is another version. It's like the chasseur maudit, the cursed hunter who never stops hunting. That's what they are, Actaeon and that lot. But if you're on sex strike, you go back to your kin. This is the place of kinship. So it says incest and orgiastic sex there, but it should be kinship. Some people have sex on the brain. Anyway, so that's the...
Rituals of license.
Rituals of license, yeah. Yeah, okay, but it's kinship. That side is kinship, this side is marriage, okay? Yep. So you go back to your kin at dark moon. Now, your wife is staying with her kin, and she's involved in the incestuous rituals of license that are happening with her kinsman. You can get involved with your classificatory sisters. So you are, as a husband, you're being cuckolded by your wife's kin. But all of them, too, are cuckolds because you're with your sister who are their wives. Simple. Does that make sense? You may be cuckolded, but you're also cuckolding the husbands of your clan sisters. You're in ritual power mode, which means you're sharing gender of power with your kin. So that should mean you're very gender ambiguous. You dress up as a woman whilst your sisters are dressing up as male, an animal. In a classic moiety system, we should see reciprocal cuckoldry as marital bonds get broken up. Falstaff decrees, and my horns I bequeath to your husbands. That's the ritual logic of the play, which on the surface moralises about privatised sexual interests of Christian husbands. And just recall the Bayaka saying the women's biggest husband is the moon, and the moon, the men are in rivalry with the moon. When they go back to the moon, which is when they menstruate, men want to try to cut them from the moon, which means stop them menstruating, make them pregnant. Just the last bit is Verdi and Boito, because Verdi and Boito give the finest ending, the most majestic ending in their final fugal. They have this beautiful fugal chorus that Verdi wrote. So it's an incredible ensemble that kind of hurtles right to the end. And it celebrates the world-shaking power of laughter. Their Falstaff is the most ample and all-encompassing. In terms of a magico-ritual structure, he is the lunar trickster, but he's the wild huntsman, he's the Windsor stag and the carnival king. All the signals of ritual potency derived from the ancient logic of hunting and fertility by the moon are contained by his mighty stomach. Licentious and riotous, he's the common wheel on which all the people live, the whole world as a jest. Without annexing this enormity, this drunken king, those Tudor upstarts would remain just that. They would remain non-entities. So Prince Hal has to hang out with Falstaff to try to get some of that power. Falstaff, the lord of misrule, his cronies are portrayed as a riotous mob, looting and thieving. But the truth is, these crowned heads with their secret star chambers have stolen the magic and trickery which right royally belongs to us. So who are the thieves? That's full stop.